52 years old, and I suffered a massive stroke. The trip is already paid for, baby. You just focus on getting better, my husband said, zipping up the luggage. They flew out, the whole family, leaving me behind. From my hospital bed, I immediately called my notary. When they returned, tanned and happy, a surprise was waiting. The morning light streamed through the sheer curtains of the spacious kitchen in their upscale Atlanta home. Zendaya Sterling, Zenny to her close friends, was preparing breakfast for her family. With precise, deliberate movements, she sliced cheese for the grits, occasionally glancing at the stock market summaries open on her tablet. A few strands of silver threaded her dark hair, pulled back into a neat professional bun. At 52, Zenny looked fit, disciplined, and energetic, traits honed over decades of working as a leading financial analyst. The sound of running water drifted in from the master bathroom. Her husband, Langston, was finally up. Zenny sighed, placing the third cup of coffee on the counter. Their daughter, Solange, was already seated at the polished granite island, absorbed in her phone. "Mom, can you spot me $1,500 until payday? My agency is lagging on my commission check, and I need to pay the membership fee for my SoulCycle class," Solange requested without looking up. Zenny nodded, habitually opening her banking app. Requests for money had become such a routine occurrence that they no longer warranted questions or discussion. "Transferred," Zenny replied tersely, sending the funds before returning to scramble the eggs. Langston appeared in the doorway, wearing a worn robe, his hair still wet, and the familiar bags under his eyes prominent. 28 years of marriage had transformed him from a promising history scholar into a tired community college professor, resigned to playing the second fiddle in the family. "Morning," he mumbled, moving to his seat. "Langston, don't forget I can't pick you up later," Zenny said, setting down plates. "I have a meeting with clients at 6. Langston sighed, but quickly deflated under her firm gaze. "Fine, I'll take Marta." Solange finally looked up from her phone. "Speaking of money, Mom, have you reconsidered helping me with the down payment on the new Escalade? Mine is practically falling apart." "Solange, we discussed this," Zenny replied calmly, a steel edge creeping into her voice. "I just paid for your 2-week trip to Cancun last month." "But Mom, you know I have to look the part at the agency," Solange pressed. "A reliable car is part of the image. How am I supposed to drive high-end clients in a beat-up SUV?" Zenny looked at her daughter silently. Solange was so much like her younger self, that same drive, but directed not at a career, but at a life of leisure. After graduating from the tourism program, she'd landed a job at a prestigious travel agency, but preferred to talk about her job rather than actually work. "I'll think about it," Zenny finally conceded, even though she knew she would eventually agree. She always did. The front door slammed, and Akira, her youngest son, burst into the kitchen. At 25, he was a perpetual student and a seeker of professional callings, having cycled through 3 jobs since getting his law degree. He was currently working as a paralegal at a small firm, dreaming of a real legal fight. "Hey, everybody!" he exclaimed brightly, kissing his mother on the cheek. "Mom, you're the best. Thanks for the transfer. I already pulled my documents from the old place. I'm starting at a new firm tomorrow." "Again, Akira?" Zenny asked tiredly. "We agreed you'd stick with one place for at least 6 months." "Mom, there were 0 growth opportunities there. This is real legal practice, and they're talking future partnership." Akira spoke quickly and passionately, as he always did when defending his impulsive decisions. Zenny shook her head and checked the time. "I have to run. I'll be late tonight. A management meeting." She quickly finished her coffee, gathered documents into her leather briefcase, adjusted her tailored suit, and headed for the door. "Langston, don't forget to run the dishwasher and pull the chicken out of the freezer. Solange, water the plants. Akira, take out the recycling." Routine morning commands met with routine nods. Zenny knew half of it wouldn't be done, and she would take care of it herself later. The entire day at the top financial consulting firm on Peachtree Street, where Zenny worked as a lead analyst, was consumed by meetings and conference calls. After lunch, the principal of her nephew's high school called about behavioral issues. Zenny promised to talk to her sister. Then she had to manage an overdue loan payment for Akira. The bank had sent a default notice. That evening, riding the crowded MARTA train home, Zenny was scrolling through resort photos on her phone. The idea had started a week ago when she saw an ad for the Maldives. Turquoise ocean, white sand beaches, overwater bungalows. The last time the whole family had vacationed was 3 years ago, and even then, it was just a short trip to Cancun because Langston hated flying. I need to give them a gift, Zenny thought, gazing at the luxurious resort pictures. Akira will stabilize, Solange will mature, and Langston and I, maybe we can remember why we fell in love. There was no one home. A note from Langston lay on the counter. Went to an alumni gathering, back late. The chicken was still frozen, the plants were dry, the recycling hadn't been touched. Zenny mechanically completed the household chores, ate a reheated bowl of soup, and sat down at her laptop. Until midnight, she worked on a financial plan for the next 6 months. If she tightened her budget, took on extra projects, and postponed the planned bathroom renovation, they could afford the Maldives by May. All she had to do was work 7 days a week for the next 4 months. And so began her relentless grind, up at 5 in the morning to finish chores before work. Home at 9 in the evening with extra projects, weekends spent glued to her laptop. Rare calls came only with questions. Mom, where are the winter coats? Zenny, I can't find a clean shirt. Moms, can you send another $50 for an Uber? By February, Zenny had finalized the hotel and dates. She booked an overwater villa, the largest one, with 2 bedrooms and a private plunge pool. She paid for the flights, insurance, and transfers. All for those happy faces she imagined seeing when she announced the gift. In early March, with everything paid for and booked, Zenny gathered the family. I have a surprise for you, she said, looking at their confused expressions. In May, we are all flying to the Maldives for 2 weeks. The reaction exceeded all expectations. Solange squealed and rushed to hug her mother. Akira was skeptical at first, then frantically Googled the resort. Even Langston smiled and awkwardly hugged Zenny. That's incredible, he muttered. Are you sure we can afford this? I calculated everything, Zenny smiled, savoring the rare moment of family unity. The next 2 months flew by in a frenzy of preparation. Solange endlessly bought new swimwear and beach outfits, constantly asking her mother's opinion. Akira enthusiastically researched scuba tours and local attractions. Langston, overcoming his fears, read reviews about the flights and watched videos about the tropical islands. And Zenny worked. The new project proved more complex than she anticipated. Management demanded results. Clients changed the terms. Late-night meetings, stress, constant sleep deprivation. But she endured, knowing that soon they would all be together, happy by the ocean. A week before the trip, Solange approached her with an unexpected request. Mom, can I bring Kofi? You know, the guy I'm dating. He can buy his own ticket. He just needs a spot in our villa. Zenny struggled to control her irritation. Solange, this is a family vacation. Besides, the villa is only designed for 4 people. But Mom, we've been together for 6 months. He's practically family. Solange pouted, just as she did when demanding something as a child. No, Zenny said firmly. And that is final. Solange slammed the door. She remained demonstratively silent during dinner. Langston, as usual, tried not to interfere in conflicts between his wife and daughter. Akira was too busy choosing excursions to notice the family drama. 3 days before their flight, on a Wednesday, Zenny woke up feeling like her head was filled with lead. Nausea churned in her throat and her right arm tingled. Overworked, she thought. It'll pass. She struggled out of bed, trying not to wake Langston. In the bathroom, Zenny splashed cold water on her face and looked at her reflection. A pale face, circles under her eyes, new wrinkles that hadn't been there a month ago. It's fine. I'll relax in the Maldives, she thought, opening the medicine cabinet for a pain reliever. She only had to hold on for 3 more days, but fate had other plans. That May morning, Zenny was planning to make a celebratory breakfast. With only 3 days until their flight, she wanted to build anticipation for the vacation. Biscuits and gravy for Langston, pancakes for Solange, and bacon and eggs for Akira, a little bit of everyone's southern favorites. Zenny was meticulously chopping vegetables when she felt the knife slip from her suddenly numb fingers. A strange sensation spread across her entire right arm, then her leg. Zenny tried to lean on the countertop, but her body wouldn't obey. Everything swam before her eyes. "Langston!" she called out, barely a whisper, but her voice sounded distorted, alien. Zenny tried to take a step toward the door and collapsed onto the floor, overturning a stool. The crash woke Langston. "What the... Zenny?" He rushed into the kitchen in his unbuttoned pajamas and froze, seeing his wife on the floor. "God, what happened?" Zenny wanted to answer, but her tongue felt swollen and uncooperative. She could only stare at her husband, trying to convey the fear and pain that had locked her body. "Call 911 quickly!" Langston frantically searched for his phone, bumping into furniture. "Don't move. Everything will be fine." A noise came from Solange's room. "What is all that noise so early in the morning?" she asked sleepily, peeking out the door. "Your mom is sick! Call 911 now!" Langston yelled, kneeling beside his wife. Solange, seeing her mother on the floor, pressed her hands to her mouth in horror. "Mom, what is it?" "I don't know. Call the ambulance faster." The next few minutes merged into a blurry scene for Zenny. Frightened screams, hands trying to lift her, Akira's voice rushing into the kitchen. "What? How? When did this happen?" Consciousness flickered. The ambulance arrived in 12 minutes. A young medic quickly assessed the situation. "Looks like a stroke. Immediate hospitalization is necessary," he said calmly, giving instructions to his partner. "Who will ride along?" "I will." Langston stepped forward. "She's my wife." Zenny was carefully transferred onto the stretcher. At the last moment, already in the doorway, she found the strength to weakly squeeze Solange's hand, as if trying to say, "Don't worry, I'll be fine." In the hospital emergency room, everything happened fast. The attending neurologist, a heavy-set woman with a short haircut, quickly examined Zenny. Clear signs of ischemic stroke, immediate CT scan, and transfer to the ICU. Zenny's gurney disappeared behind double doors, leaving a distraught Langston in the hallway. He sank into a plastic chair, covering his face with his hands. The phone in his pocket vibrated nonstop. Solange and Akira were demanding updates. The doctor came out 2 hours later. "Are you Zendaya Sterling's husband?" "Yes!" Langston jumped up. "How is she?" "Ischemic stroke in the middle cerebral artery territory. Her condition is critical but stable. We administered thrombolytics and performed initial procedures. She's in the ICU now. The next 24 hours are critical." "Will she live?" Langston's voice trembled. "The prognosis is cautiously positive. It's good she was brought in so quickly, but she faces a long and challenging recovery, right-sided paralysis and impaired speech." The doctor spoke, and Langston felt the ground disappearing beneath him. "You can visit her tomorrow if her condition stabilizes." Langston returned home that evening, exhausted from the hospital waiting and bureaucracy. Solange and Akira met him in the hallway. "Well, what did they say?" Solange was pale, her eyes red from crying. "A stroke?" Langston replied tiredly, taking off his coat. "A bad one. She's in the ICU." "Oh my God," Solange whispered. "So, what now?" Akira asked. "When will she be discharged?" "I don't know, son." Langston walked into the kitchen, mechanically turning on the kettle. The knife Zenny had dropped still lay on the floor, and the unfinished vegetables sat on the cutting board. Time seemed to have stopped here. Akira rubbed his forehead. "What about the Maldives? The flight is in 3 days." Langston and Solange looked at him in confusion. "What Maldives?" Solange snapped. "Don't you get it? Mom had a stroke." "I get it," Akira retorted. "It was all paid for, booked. Mom worked so hard for this. I'm just wondering what we do with the tickets and the reservations." Langston collapsed heavily onto a chair. "I don't know. I'll have to look at the documents. Maybe we can get at least some of the money back. The next 3 days were spent in hospital corridors. Zenny was moved from the ICU to a regular room, but she faced a long road to recovery. Her right side was mostly non-functional, and her speech was severely impaired, but her consciousness was clear, which the doctor said was a good sign. On the 4th day after the incident, Langston, Solange, and Akira entered the hospital room. Zenny raised herself slightly on her pillows at their appearance. Pale, drawn, with a distant gaze, this woman seemed a shadow of the strong, energetic Zenny she once was. "Hello," she uttered softly, the single word requiring visible effort. "How are you feeling?" Langston sat on the edge of the bed, but instead of flowers or fruit, he held a leather folder of documents. Rehab will take at least 6 months. Zenny managed to answer slowly, her words slurred. An awkward silence hung in the air. Solange nervously fidgeted with the strap of her handbag, a birthday gift from her mother. "Mom, we were talking," Solange finally started, "about the Maldives trip." "Yes, it has to be postponed," Zenny replied with effort. "Actually." Langston cleared his throat, avoiding his wife's direct gaze. "Zendaya, we talked to the travel agent. Rescheduling or canceling would cost almost the full price, practically throwing the money away." Zenny felt a chill run down her spine. "What are you suggesting?" Every syllable was a struggle, but she had to understand what her husband was hinting at. "The tickets are already paid for, baby. You just focus on getting better." Langston attempted a smile, but it looked guilty. "The kids and I will fly out, just as planned. You need peace and treatment right now. And us. Well, it's just silly to lose all that money." Zenny stared at them, unable to believe her ears. She was paralyzed after a stroke, and they were preparing to fly off to the resort she had paid for with her own savings. "Who will stay with me?" was all she could ask. "We arranged everything with Miss Ruby, the neighbor. She'll stop by every day," Akira quickly supplied. "And you have nurses and doctors here. You're in good hands, Mom." Langston placed the folder on the bedside table. "This is the power of attorney document for managing your accounts. We'll need access to cash for pocket money and expenses there. Excursions, you know. Everything in the Maldives is expensive." Zenny looked silently at the ceiling, feeling a treacherous tear roll down her cheek. Her entire life had been lived for them, saving for a rainy day, denying herself small luxuries, and this was her gratitude. "Will you sign it?" Langston handed her a pen. Her hand barely listened, but Zenny found the strength to take it. "Of course," she whispered, and signed the document with a shaky, uneven script. What else could she do? 'Cause a scene in her condition? Forbid them from going? They would do as they pleased anyway, and she had no strength to resist. When they left, discussing which swimsuits to pack, Zenny stared out the window at the blossoming magnolia tree in the hospital courtyard. The room was quiet, except for the beeping of monitors. Outside, the leaves rustled softly, and laughter drifted from the playground. Life went on, but for Zenny, it seemed to have frozen in this sterile room with the smell of medicine. Miss Ruby came by that evening, a kindly, heavy-set woman in her late 70s, carrying a bag full of sweet potato pies. "Zendaya, honey," she lamented, seeing her neighbor. "What on earth happened to you? The minute I heard, I came right over." Langston had rushed by, she explained, saying they had an emergency trip to take, and asked her to look in on Zenny. "Emergency trip?" Zenny laughed bitterly to herself. What a convenient story for the old lady. "Thank you, Ruby," Zenny managed to utter with difficulty. "You shouldn't have." "Nonsense! We're neighbors, aren't we?" Miss Ruby waved her hand, settling onto a chair. "I brought you some homemade pie and a jar of sweet tea. That hospital food is something else." The elderly woman talked endlessly, sharing the latest neighborhood news, gossip about other neighbors, and stories about her many grandchildren. Zenny listened absently. The inner cold that settled after the conversation with her family wouldn't subside. The next day, Nurse Imani Jones, a woman Zenny's age with kind but weary eyes, entered the room. "How are we feeling today, Ms. Sterling?" she asked, checking the IV drip. Zenny wanted to answer fine, but unexpectedly burst into tears instead. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and she couldn't stop them. "What is it?" the nurse worried, sitting beside her. Stuttering and pausing, Zenny told her what had happened. The trip she had planned for the whole family, the betrayal of her husband and children flying to the Maldives while she lay immobilized, and the power of attorney. "I didn't even look at what I signed," she finished. Nurse Imani frowned, picked up the folder from the table, and studied the document carefully. Suddenly, she gasped. "Ms. Sterling, this is a general power of attorney over all your assets. Not just accounts, but real estate, stocks, and bonds. They can manage everything you own." Zenny felt the room spin. How could they? Had they only ever seen her as a wallet, a source of comfort, throughout their years of her dedicated care? The magnitude of the betrayal made it hard to breathe. "We need to address this immediately," Nurse Imani said decisively. "Do you have a reliable person, a lawyer or notary whom you trust?" Zenny thought for a moment, then remembered Senator Josiah Green, a corporate attorney she had worked with at the bank years ago. They had maintained a friendly, professional relationship, occasionally seeing each other at events. Gathering all her strength, she dictated the phone number to the nurse. "Thank you," Zenny whispered. "I don't know what I'd do without you." "You focus on getting well," Nurse Imani gently patted her hand. "We'll handle this." That evening, Miss Ruby came again, bringing biscuits and news. "Your folks left for their trip, Zendaya. Saw the taxi pull up to the condo, loaded the bags, happy as can be, smiling. Langston told me you gave them your blessing so the tickets wouldn't go to waste. You're such a good woman, thinking of your family even in this state." Zenny closed her eyes so the neighbor wouldn't see the pain reflected in them. "Gave them my blessing," a convenient phrasing. "Thank you for stopping by," was all she could say. Zenny couldn't sleep that night. Muted sounds of hospital life filtered in from the doorway. Nurses' steps, the beeping of monitors, distant voices. And somewhere up in the dark sky, a plane carried her family toward warm seas and white sands. "How could I have been so blind?" she thought, staring at the ceiling. So many years living with people and not seeing their true faces. So many years giving everything and getting nothing in return. For the first time in years, Zenny felt utterly alone. And in that isolation, in the silence of the hospital room, bathed in the light of the street lamp falling through the window, a decision was born that would change her entire future. The next day, as the morning sun barely pierced the hospital room blinds, a quiet knock came at the door. Zenny painfully turned her head. Senator Josiah Green stood on the threshold, a tall, trim man in his early 60s with neatly trimmed gray hair. He held a leather briefcase and a small bouquet of white chrysanthemums. "Good morning, Ms. Sterling," he said, stopping at the doorway. "May I come in?" "Josiah." Zenny tried to smile, but it came out as a weak grimace. "Thank you for coming." The notary approached, placed the flowers in a water pitcher, and sat on the chair beside the bed. His attentive gaze swept the room, noting the absence of other flowers or any sign of family visits. "Your nurse called me," she explained the situation. He spoke calmly, without excessive pity, which Zenny especially appreciated. Pity felt unbearable right now. "I brought the documents. Where is this power of attorney in question?" Zenny weakly nodded toward the bedside table. Josiah Green took the folder, examined the contents carefully, and shook his head. "Indeed, a general power of attorney with extended powers. The right to dispose of all your personal and real property, bank accounts, and securities." He frowned. "Who prepared this document?" "My husband," Zenny said with difficulty. "I thought as much." The notary nodded. "There are flaws in the execution. First, there is no proper witness notary present, which already casts doubt on the document's legitimacy. Second, it lacks the detailed scope of authority that is mandatory for this type of POA. He pulled forms from his briefcase and laid them out on the movable table. We will immediately draw up a statement of revocation. Then, we will prepare notices for the banks to freeze all operations on your accounts until the circumstances are clarified. Nurse Imani Jones appeared in the doorway with a tray holding cups of tea and a plate of crackers. "I figured you could use some sustenance," she smiled, placing the tray on the table. "How is the progress?" "We are proceeding with the restoration of justice," Josiah Green replied, nodding gratefully to the nurse. "Miss Sterling, I need details. Which banks should I notify? Do you have safety deposit boxes? Any property other than your primary residence?" For the next hour, Zenny, overcoming her speech difficulties, slowly and thoroughly answered the notary's questions. Nurse Imani helped when a long name or sequence of numbers was particularly hard to pronounce. Josiah Green methodically filled out the forms, occasionally clarifying details. "We will annul the power of attorney today," he stated decisively, finishing his writing. "If I may offer a piece of advice, it is time to review other legal documents, specifically your will." Zenny paused. She had written her will years ago before Akira was born. Back then it was simple. Her husband and children received equal shares of the estate. The document hadn't been reviewed since. "Yes," she said firmly after a pause. "I want to change the will." Josiah Green looked at her intently. "Are you sure? This is a serious decision, especially in your condition." "Exactly, in my condition," Zenny countered, mastering her unruly tongue. "I see, more clearly than ever." The notary nodded. "Very well, let's discuss the details." While Zenny's family was packing their bags, not bothering to call the hospital, she, with the help of her notary, not only revoked the POA but also drafted a new will. The majority of her estate was now allocated to a neuro-rehabilitation charity assisting stroke patients, as well as a generous bequest to Imani Jones, who in a few days had shown more care than her own family had in years. Zenny also arranged for the creation of an endowment to support young neuro-rehabilitation specialists. "Are you certain?" Josiah Green asked cautiously, finalizing the documents. "Absolutely," Zenny answered firmly, feeling a strange sense of relief. For the first time in years, she was making a decision based only on herself and her wishes. Nurse Imani, upon hearing about the will, shook her head resolutely. "Ms. Sterling, I can't accept this. We've just met." "You are the only person who has shown care," Zenny said slowly but clearly. "Please accept it as a symbol of my gratitude." Josiah Green packed the documents into his briefcase. "Now for the practical steps. I will send notifications to all banks where you hold accounts. I will block any real estate transactions in your name. I will establish legal protection for your assets throughout your rehabilitation." Zenny nodded gratefully. Thank you." "My pleasure." The notary stood, preparing to leave. "I will visit you regularly. We'll monitor the situation together." When he left, Nurse Imani helped Zenny get into a more comfortable position in bed. "How are you feeling?" Strange," Zenny admitted. "Like I just woke up from a long sleep." "That's a good sign," the nurse smiled. "It means recovery has begun, and not just the physical kind." That evening, as Zenny was falling asleep, the phone on the bedside table vibrated quietly. She managed to reach for it with her good hand. Langston's name appeared on the screen. With a composure that surprised even herself, Zenny pressed the answer button. "Yes, baby, it's me." Langston's voice sounded nervous and strained. "We're at the airport. There's a problem with the payment. The card isn't working for some reason." Zenny remained silent, listening to her husband's frantic breathing on the other end of the line. "Are you hearing me?" he asked after a pause. "We need to pay the baggage fees and for the unlimited Wi-Fi at the resort. The card says declined." "Unfortunately, no," Zenny answered calmly, surprised at how clear her voice sounded. "The power of attorney has been revoked, and I have generally revised our financial relationship." "What do you mean, revised?" Langston's voice edged into panic. "We are at the airport. We need the money." "You have your own cards and your own savings." Zenny was amazed at the serenity of her voice. "Enjoy your vacation, on your own dime." "Zendaya, you're not well. This is the aftermath of the stroke. You need therapy," Langston shouted. But she had already pressed the end call button. The phone immediately rang again, then again. Notifications about messages popped up, first from Langston, then Solange, then Akira. Zenny silenced the phone and placed its screen down. For the first time in years, she didn't rush to solve someone else's problems. In the morning, she was awakened by voices in the hallway. It sounded like Langston was trying to break into the room, but the duty nurse wouldn't let him. "You don't understand, she's my wife!" His indignant voice carried to Zenny. "She's taken an irrational decision. She's not herself." "Visiting hours are strictly 4 p.m. to 7 p.m., the nurse replied unperturbed. "And according to our records, the patient's condition is stable with positive dynamics. If you want to speak with her, please return during visiting hours." The footsteps receded and silence fell. Zenny closed her eyes, feeling the tension of the past few days finally release. She didn't know if they had ultimately flown or not, and for the first time, she didn't care. At noon, Nurse Imani appeared. "You have a visitor," she announced. "May I let him in?" Zenny tensed, thinking Langston had returned, but Josiah Green appeared in the doorway. "All documents are executed. Notifications have been sent," he announced without preamble. "Your accounts are secured. Your property is safe. Now you can focus on your recovery." "Thank you," Zenny thanked him sincerely. "What about my family?" "According to my information, they did fly out," the notary replied. "Your husband had to use his own credit card to cover the additional expenses." Zenny nodded. Strangely, the news didn't cause pain, only relief. Now that the decision had been made, she could move forward. "I called a friend who is a rehabilitative specialist," Josiah Green continued. "He is ready to take on your recovery program. A very good doctor. He worked in Switzerland." I'm not sure if I can afford it right now," Zenny stammered, thinking about her frozen accounts. "Don't worry about that," the notary smiled. "You have sufficient funds in a cash account that was not included in the power of attorney. Furthermore, your insurance covers a significant portion of the rehabilitation." The next 2 weeks, Zenny devoted entirely to recovery. With the same determination she had once used to build her career, she now fought for the return of her mobility and speech. Nurse Imani helped her with exercises, brought her books on neuroplasticity, and provided support whenever Zenny was ready to give up. The rehabilitative specialist, Dr. Elijah Vance, was demanding but highly effective. "Listen, Miss Sterling," he would say, helping her perform complex exercises for her right hand. "The brain has an amazing ability to recover, but it requires 2 things, consistent practice and a positive mindset. I can provide the first. The second is entirely up to you." And Zenny tried. Every day, she performed all the prescribed exercises, forcing her disobedient muscles to work. With the help of a speech pathologist, she trained her speech, repeating complex tongue twisters. In the evenings, she read aloud, recording herself to track her progress. Josiah Green visited her regularly, helping her sort out legal matters. They moved all her accounts to a new bank, changed passwords and access, and prepared documents for the division of property. "Are you sure about the divorce?" he asked one day, filling out yet another form. "Perhaps you should wait until you are fully recovered." "No," Zenny replied firmly. The slightest trace of her former uncertainty was gone from her voice. "It is precisely now, when I am physically weak, that I need legal protection." The notary nodded understandingly. "A sensible decision." There was no news from the family. Zenny's phone remained silent, no calls, no messages. Sometimes she looked at photos of the resort in the Maldives, imagining them sunbathing, swimming, and enjoying life. Strangely, these thoughts didn't cause bitterness, only quiet determination to follow her own path. The day before the family's return from the Maldives, Zenny was transferred from the hospital to a rehabilitation center. The room was bright and spacious, with a large window overlooking a park. Josiah Green personally accompanied her during the transfer, ensuring all necessary paperwork was in order. "You'll be comfortable here," he said, helping her get settled. "And most importantly, you'll receive professional recovery treatment." Zenny looked at him with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you for your help." "You already have," the notary smiled, "with your tenacity and will to live. You know, Ms. Sterling, I have seen many people in crisis. Most of them break. You are one of the rare few who emerge stronger." That same evening, Miss Ruby called, agitated and rambling. "Zendaya, honey, I don't know what to think. Your folks came back from their trip, and they can't get into the condo. The locks have been changed. Langston called me asking if I knew what was going on. I told him I had no idea, and that you were still in the hospital." "It's all right, Ruby," Zenny replied calmly. "It's supposed to be that way." "But what about them? Where will they live?" "Solange has her own apartment," Zenny reminded her. "And Akira does too. Langston can stay with the children." "Oh, Zendaya." Miss Ruby was clearly bewildered. "What happened between you all?" "Just life," Zenny answered. "Sometimes it teaches unexpected lessons." An hour later, the phone erupted in a furious ring. It was Langston. Zenny stared at the screen for a long time, deciding whether to answer. Finally, she pressed the button. "Hello? What is happening?" Her husband's outraged voice burst into the quiet room. "They won't let us into the house." "That is no longer your house," she replied calmly. "I filed for divorce. You can move in with the children. They have their own places, which, incidentally, were purchased with my money." "Zendaya, you're not well. This is the aftermath of the stroke. You need therapy," Langston shouted. "On the contrary, I am finally myself," Zenny replied, feeling her voice grow confident again. "And yes, the stroke certainly clarified a lot. You cannot do this to us. We are your family." "Family?" Zenny laughed bitterly. "Family does not abandon a loved one in the hospital for a vacation. Family does not deceive with powers of attorney. Family supports you in distress rather than thinking of their own advantage." "Zendaya, listen, all the documents are with my lawyer," she interrupted. "He will contact you to discuss the divorce terms." Zenny pressed the end call button and turned off her phone. A calming silence settled in the room. Outside the window, the sunset began, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Zenny looked at this riot of color, feeling a strange serenity. For the first time in many years, she was completely in control of her life and her future. And although months of difficult rehabilitation and legal battles lay ahead, she knew she would prevail. She slept without sleeping pills that night. She did not dream of nightmares about illness and betrayal. She dreamed of the ocean, vast, calm, with soft waves rolling onto white sand. She stood on the shore, strong, healthy, free, watching the dawn paint the horizon in the gentle colors of the sunrise. A new day, a new life. And she was ready for this journey. 6 months later, the morning sun streaming through the light curtains woke Zenny before her alarm. She had been living in her new studio apartment for half a year, and every morning began the same way, with a feeling of freedom and peace. Zenny rose slowly from the bed. Her right leg was still a little stiff in the mornings, but it grew stronger every day. She set aside her cane, she preferred to go without it at home, training her balance, and walked to the window. Life was already bustling below. Young mothers with strollers hurried to the park. Older neighbors settled on benches with newspapers. Runners were out for their morning jogs. Zenny smiled at her reflection in the window glass. She had changed significantly over the past months, not just internally, but externally. She had traded her severe business haircut for a softer, more feminine style. She had abandoned dark suits for lighter, looser outfits. Even her posture was different, more relaxed, yet confident. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. Nurse Imani Jones's name lit up the screen. "Good morning," her friend greeted brightly. "Are you ready for the big day?" As ready as a person can be for the opening of her own center. Zenny replied with slight anxiety. I'm a little nervous. That's normal, Imani reassured her. I'll pick you up at 10 o'clock. Everything is ready. Just the final touches left. After breakfast, Zenny carefully chose her outfit. Today was a special day, the opening of the New Life Support Center for Stroke Patients, co-founded by Zenny and Imani. What had started as a modest idea for a support group had in a few months blossomed into a full-fledged organization with an office, a staff of consultants, and ambitious plans. Zenny chose a light blue dress with a wide belt and comfortable but elegant low-heeled shoes. Looking at herself in the mirror, she couldn't help but notice how her face had changed. The wrinkles hadn't vanished, but her gaze was livelier, clearer. She possessed that internal glow that even the most expensive cosmetics couldn't imitate. The doorbell rang. Instead of the expected Imani, Akira stood on the doorstep, pale, drawn, and wearing a crumpled shirt. "Mom," he began uncertainly, "can I come in? I need to talk." Zenny silently stepped aside, letting her son into the apartment. They had seen each other only twice in the last 6 months. Both meetings had ended in arguments and mutual accusations. "What's wrong?" she asked when they were seated in the living area. Akira nervously clasped his hands. I have problems. I was let go from the firm. I haven't been able to find a job for 2 weeks." Zenny looked closely at her son, noting the shadows under his eyes, the messy stubble, and his trembling hands. "And what do you want from me?" she asked pointedly. "I need help, Mom." Akira lowered his gaze. "I only have enough money to cover rent this month. After that, I don't know what I'll do." In the past, Zenny would have immediately opened her wallet or transferred the necessary amount, but now she only shook her head. "Akira, you're a lawyer. You have a degree, you have experience, even if it's small. Why did you come for money again, instead of advice or support?" "What's the difference?" he answered with sudden anger. "You always helped, and now, because of some grudge, you've abandoned all of us." "Not because of a grudge," Zenny calmly countered, "because of the realization that I was only harming you with my excessive care." She looked at him with honest, unflinching love. "Look at yourself, Akira. You're 26, and you still haven't learned to stand on your own 2 feet." "That's cruel," he whispered. "It's the truth," Zenny said softly. "And you can be angry, you can be hurt, but deep down, you know I'm right." She walked to her son and for the first time in a long time placed a hand on his shoulder. "I can help you find a job. I have connections in the legal field. I can give recommendations for an interview. But there will be no more money, Akira. It won't help you or our relationship." He looked at his mother with disbelief. "You're serious? You won't even lend me money until I find a job?" "I won't even lend you money," Zenny confirmed, "because I know that as soon as you have my money, the incentive to look for work will immediately disappear." Akira jumped up. "You've changed, Mom. You've become tough, heartless." "No, son," Zenny shook her head. "For the first time in years, I've become myself. And the strangest thing is that none of you even noticed that before. I was just a function, a resource serving your needs." When he left slamming the door, Zenny felt not offense, but a strange calm. Previously, such a conversation with her son would have derailed her for days. Now she simply sighed and returned to her preparations. She had important work to do, work that gave her strength and meaning. Imani arrived right on time. Seeing her friend, she immediately knew something had happened. "It's fine. Akira stopped by," Zenny answered briefly. "He asked for money. I refused, offered help finding a job." Imani nodded approvingly. "Good for you, although I imagine it wasn't easy." "You know," Zenny mused, "before it would have been unbearable, but now I feel like I found some kind of inner anchor that was never there before." On the way to the center, they discussed the final preparations for the opening. Over months of working together, their friendship had deepened. They complemented each other perfectly. Zenny, with her organizational skills, business acumen, and connections, and Imani, with her medical experience, empathy, and ability to connect with the most complex patients. The New Life Support Center was located in a small but cozy space on the ground floor of an apartment building. Light walls, comfortable furniture, and a well-thought-out navigation system for people with limited mobility. Every detail had been meticulously planned. As the scheduled time approached, the first visitors began to gather, stroke patients and their relatives. Zenny greeted guests at the entrance, making an effort to give attention to everyone. An elderly gentleman with a cane, a retired math professor who had suffered a stroke 2 years ago. Beside him, a young woman, his daughter, who had become his primary caregiver. A young man in a wheelchair, an athlete whose career had been cut short by a brain hemorrhage, and an elderly couple, the wife supporting her husband, who moved with difficulty but wouldn't give up. In each of them, Zenny saw a reflection of her own story. The same despair, the same fear, the same determination to fight. And for everyone, she had words of support, not empty platitudes, but an honest conversation from someone who had walked the same path. When everyone had gathered, Zenny stepped up to a small platform. Excitement washed over her. It was the first time in a long time she was speaking in public, even if it was a small audience. "Good afternoon, dear friends," she began, trying to speak clearly, though a slight hesitance in her speech still remained. "I am happy to welcome you to the New Life Support Center. A year ago, I suffered a severe ischemic stroke. That event divided my life into before and after." Zenny looked around the room, seeing understanding and empathy in the eyes of the gathered people. "The stroke took a lot from me. My health, my familiar way of life, and my illusions about a strong family. But it also gave me something priceless, a new perspective on life, true friends, and an understanding of what truly matters." She smiled, glancing at Imani, who stood by the wall. "Our center was created not just for physical rehabilitation, although that is vital. We are here to help you return to a full life with new priorities, a new understanding of yourself and the world around you, to support you in moments of despair and to share the joy of small victories." The applause that rippled through the room touched Zenny deeply. For the first time, she felt genuine acknowledgement, not for her money, not for her position, but for something she had truly done herself, investing her soul and experience. Closer to evening, as most of the guests had left, an unexpected figure appeared in the doorway of the center. Langston, her ex-husband. He stood uncertainly, as if doubting whether to enter. Noticing Zenny, he walked toward her. "Hi," he said softly. "Can we talk?" Zenny nodded, gesturing toward a small office away from the main hall. Once they were alone, Langston remained silent for a long time, looking at his ex-wife as if seeing her for the first time. "You look great," he finally said. "Completely different." "Thank you," Zenny replied simply. "You've changed too." It was true. Langston had lost weight. His features were sharper. There was more gray in his hair. But the main change was in his gaze. The familiar shadow of self-pity was gone. Some new focus had appeared. "I heard about your center," he said after a pause. "Akira told me you organized something for stroke patients." "Yes, we officially opened today," Zenny confirmed. "It's admirable." Langston spoke with visible effort, choosing his words carefully. "You always had a way of organizing something significant." Zenny waited silently, sensing that he hadn't come just to compliment her new endeavor. "I wanted to apologize," Langston finally managed. "For the Maldives, for how we acted. It was unforgivable." "Why now?" Zenny asked. "It's been almost a year." Langston sighed. "I guess I needed time to truly realize it, and to see that you were okay, that you handled it." "So if I hadn't handled it, you wouldn't have come?" she clarified with gentle irony. "No, not like that." Langston shook his head. It's just, when you filed for divorce, I was furious. I thought you were ungrateful, cruel. I told the kids it was a consequence of the illness, that you weren't yourself. But then, when I had to start paying my own bills, finding an apartment, dealing with problems, I began to realize how much you did for us and how little we appreciated it. Zenny remained silent, but a strange warmth spread inside her, not from her ex-husband's words, but from the realization that she had indeed been right, that her decision had not only changed her own life, but had also forced those around her to change. "And then I heard about your center," Langston continued, "about you helping other people who went through what you did, and I realized how much stronger you are than me, than all of us." "You know, Langston," Zenny said thoughtfully, "I don't hold any malice toward you. What happened was a necessary lesson for all of us." "Can we fix everything?" he asked, hopefully. Zenny shook her head. "The past, no. But we can build a new future, only now, on equal terms." "What does that mean?" Langston looked confused. "It means I will no longer sacrifice myself for someone else's comfort. I won't solve someone else's problems at the cost of my own desires. I won't pretend everything is fine when it's not." She smiled, looking out the window at the evening city. "If you are ready to accept me as I truly am, with my own priorities and boundaries, we can try to build a new relationship. Not a family in the old sense, but something more honest and equal." Langston was silent for a long time, then nodded. "I'll try, if you give me a chance." "Not a chance," Zenny corrected him. "An opportunity for both of us." When Langston left, promising to call in a few days, Imani poked her head into the office. "Everything all right?" "More than," Zenny smiled. "It seems today is a day for reconciliation and new beginnings." They left the center together into the warm summer evening. The city was living its usual life. People hurrying home, cars buzzing, lights blazing in the windows of apartment buildings. But for Zenny, everything looked different, brighter, more vibrant, more meaningful. "You know what I'm thinking?" she said as they walked along the park alley. "That sometimes you have to lose what you have to find what you truly need." Imani nodded knowingly. "Like that old saying about closed and open doors." "Exactly," Zenny agreed. "When the door to my old life closed, I thought it was the end. It turned out to be just the beginning." That evening, sitting on the balcony of her new condo with a cup of tea, Zenny thought about the strange irony of fate. She had lost her health and her family in the conventional sense, but she had gained something far more valuable: self-respect, a new calling, and the understanding that life doesn't end at 52. Even after a stroke, it can be fulfilling, meaningful, and belong, first and foremost, to herself. Daily helping other stroke patients find the strength to recover, Zenny often said, "Sometimes you have to lose what you have to find what you truly need." And she smiled, watching the despair in her listeners' eyes slowly fade, replaced by the same fire of determination that had once saved her. Thus, a terrible illness and the betrayal of her closest loved ones became for Zendaya Sterling not an end, but the beginning of a new, more conscious and authentic life. A life that had room for pain and difficulty, but also for joy, discovery, and a true, deep love, most importantly, for herself. Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story. With love and respect.